Sam Kahn works and writes for theathletic.com. He'll join us, in fact, right now on Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports. Sam with Craig and Paul and David Smoak. Sam, let me ask you this. Why is it so difficult for conferences to just sit in a room and agree on how many conference games they play, how many FCS games they should play or not? Why is that so hard to do?
Everybody's got their own agenda. And when you've got 14 teams in a conference and everybody's got different agendas, it is hard to come to consensus. So, I guess not. I say 14 teams. It's about to be 16 when Texas and Oklahoma join. So that's another tentacle to add to this. So, I mean, what fits and what works for Alabama maybe doesn't work for Vanderbilt, or what works for Kentucky maybe doesn't work for Texas A&M. So I think that's a big part of the issue. And just generally, whenever you get that many people in the room, I think it's very hard to come to consensus on anything. It might be hard to come to a consensus on what to eat for lunch, much less what kind of scheduling setup we're going to have.
Sam, when it comes to the 3-6 model, which I would assume is probably what they're going to ultimately go with because it makes the most sense, is maybe part of the argument is there are some teams that are going to feel a little slighted because they don't get the exact best three that, say, somebody else might get?
I think that's a part of it, but I think that's a smaller part of it than the fact that you're actually going to 9 conference games. I think the 9 conference games versus 8 conference games is more of a sticking point, in particularly for the Vanderbilts of the world, for the Kentuckys of the world. Maybe Kentucky's a bad example because they've been very good lately, but maybe the Missouris of the world. Because that extra conference game is an SEC game, which means it's probably going to be tougher than what you've scheduled out of conference. And then that makes it tougher to make it to bowl eligibility, which obviously affects, bonuses for coaches' contracts, which affects payouts, from the conference via the bowls. So I think that's probably more of a sticking point than the 3-6. I think, yes, definitely it's impossible to make everybody happy with a 3 permanent you get because there are some schools that maybe have more than 3 rivals that they like to play on a regular basis. And there are some that probably don't have enough to make 3. And then it makes for awkward pairings in that instance. But I think the 9 conference versus the 8 conference game is probably more of a sticking point. But I agree with you that at the end of the day, I think that's what we're going to end up with because I think that fits most of the programs better. And I think it's a better system to get more teams playing each other more frequently as opposed to now where you have Texas A&M who has played Georgia once in the 10, 11 years they've been in the conference. It's a better way to get that fixed while still preserving some of the rivalries that are very important to the conference.
Sam, what have you made of the way that ever since that ruling was passed, the conference championship game setups have just changed up? I mean, the Big 12's just stayed pat, but they still got to figure out what they're going to do in the future with the revolving of teams and all that. But what have you thought about the pretty much quick response by everybody to say, all right, we're doing away with divisions?
Yeah, not surprised at all. And I think it's just sample size. We've seen what it can do to a conference when it comes to the postseason, when it comes to the playoff, is if you get a disadvantageous matchup in the conference championship game, you can end up sending your best team home rather than getting them into the playoffs. And so, obviously, the Big 12, had its own setup and system to work with. But I think more and more the idea of having a team that can get in the playoff, play a team that's got nothing to lose, that has no shot in the playoff, is just not a good situation if you're the SEC, if you're anybody else. And so I think it's natural, and it took time to figure that out because the conference championship setup seemed sensible when you expand these conferences so large, 12 or 14 team setup, and putting them in division just made mathematical sense. It made scheduling sense. But now that we've experienced it so many times, I think it makes sense to move away from that just because of how wide ranging these conferences have become. And ultimately, the bottom line is you want your conference champion to actually be the best team in that conference that year. And getting away from a division setup, I think, allows that to happen.
Sam, as you know, a year ago at Big 12 Media Days in mid to late July in Arlington, everything seemed to be nice. Everyone was playing nice. And then a week or so later, of course, all hell broke loose. How much would your career, where would you be now? And you're already at a hell of a place in theathletic.com or whoever, if Brent Zerneman could have been in that Big 12 Media Days and asked the question about the move during the press conference.
That would have been wild. I know he said it. I talked to him not long after all that happened. After all that broke, and he told me about the face that Greg Sankey gave him when he asked the question, and it was very much an exasperated, like, oh my gosh, like, what do you know kind of look. And so I think that would have been it would have been wild to see that play out publicly as opposed to privately one-on-one, which is the way Brent did it, which is honestly, if I were Brent, I would have done it the same way. I would have done it by myself rather than in front of everybody else. But I tell you, it has changed everything. And it's funny, you say that Big 12 Media Days, gosh, that seems like 3 years ago. And it was not even a full calendar year since that happened. And it was funny, I'll never forget how kumbaya it felt, after talking to Bowlesby about all the issues and what was ahead of the conference. And it seemed like everything was very calm. And then a week later, it just all was thrown into upheaval. And boy, I feel like we've been going, spinning the hamster wheel ever since, and then going like 90 miles an hour since then. And I don't think it's really stopped because we went from that to NIL being debuted and breaking all hell breaking loose in that. And you've got, obviously the season, and then, you've got the tentacles of what happened with the Big 12. Obviously, what happened to the SEC with them taking Texas and Oklahoma affected the Big 12, affected the Conference USA, affected the American, trickle down. We're all the way trickling down to the FCS. You still have FCS moves happening at this point. So it has been a very, very long time, and it has been a very intense time. But for me as a reporter, and I'm sure for the college football fans, it's been a very entertaining time. And certainly I can say for us, it certainly has been good for business.
Sam Kahn, theathletic.com, with us on Sikkim 365 Radio. And of course, isn't it interesting now the governance meetings are going on right now. Texas and Oklahoma are a part of those, but the other four teams are in as well. Which among the four, and Cincinnati had a great year last year, Houston was good too, UCF, we know what they've done, and then Brigham Young is solid. Which of those four do you think might flourish better when the conference starts with them next year?
I mean, it's clear Cincinnati's probably in the best spot at this moment, just because they came off the playoff and locking up Luke Fickell to a new contract, and the recruiting that they've done, they've recruited at a really, really good level. I mean, look at what they did in the NFL draft. I mean, that's some impressive evaluation, impressive development that they've done. So you've got to think they're in a really good situation coming in. But I think long term, to me, Houston, I think, is the team with the highest ceiling of them all. Just because I think the institutional want to that they have been very aggressive for the last decade plus when it comes to facilities, when it comes to spending, when it becomes trying to act like a Power 5 program. Now that you're going to give them the status of the conference that they've been competing with the Baylor and the TCUs and the Texas Techs for recruits. This gives them a little bit of a boost in terms of trying to keep some of those recruits, those Houston area recruits that so many schools have come in and taken. And I think they did a really good job of closing the 22 class. They seem to be doing a good job in the transfer portal, and obviously coming off that 12-2 season, and Dana Holgorsen got himself a new contract. They seem to be spending really aggressively on staff. They're working on getting an ops building put together. They're raising money for that right now to get their own football standalone ops building. So I think when you look at all the desire to succeed from them and compared with the stability they have from a presidential standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, I think their ceiling is really high long term.
Sam, Jimbo and Saban, not quite the, I guess, spectacle that people were hoping for at SEC spring meetings. It's been more fizzle than sizzle. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
and to be quite honest with you, I'm okay with that. I think I had my fill of that back and forth. I mean, it was entertaining in the moment, certainly, and I will promise you I have never seen an impromptu press conference quite like the one that Jimbo Fisher called that Thursday morning after Nick Saban said what he said in front of his fans and boosters and whatnot. But I think it's going to stay quiet. I think we're going to see this be relatively calm, probably until game week when they meet on October 8th, and it'll start to heat up again, building up to the actual game when they play each other in Tuscaloosa. And that'll be fascinating in its own right. But I think it's going to be pretty quiet for now, unless one of them all of a sudden gets a spicy feeling and decides to start it up again. I think after Sankey, talked to him and they had meetings at SEC spring meetings, I think we won't hear much about it from here until October 8th.
I think my favorite part was A&M going and grabbing Alabama grabbing the A&M quarterback commit days after complaining about NIL. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, it's been tough. And it was a godsend for us in May. For us that create college football content.
Absolutely.
It's very much kicked up some interest at a time when there usually isn't much going on.
Yeah, I kind of hope Mac Brown and Dabo Sweeney get in a fight. I don't know. That'd be something we could talk about.
Those are two of the nicest guys all time.
One of the nicest.
Yeah.
No, I'm okay. The other one's kind of fiery now in Dabo. But, Sam, they had the topic of the SEC versus all y'all playoff was brought out and on the table. While I think most of us know that would never really work and there's no way to wrap your head around why the other conferences would agree to it, how do you think the other conferences kind of react to that? Because to me, it seems like a bit of a political stunt on the SEC's part, and it would be foolish for any of the other conferences to panic react to that just floating out there.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to react hastily to that because I think it is, people understand it's more of a threat than or more of a talking point. Like you said, political stunt is a good way to put it than it is reality. But I think it's Greg Sankey trying to put people on notice that he's going to do what's best for his conference. He's going to look out for his conference because he was part of that working group that put together that 12-team proposal that I think it's fair to say that when it came out, most college football fans seemed to be on board with it. And they squandered that opportunity because there was a group of conferences that were missed that, the SEC was taking Texas and OU and seemed to retaliate. And I guess the alliance, the three conference group that formed the alliance would be the primary group that pretty much try to shut it down. And so I think Greg's point is that the SEC is going to be fine regardless of playoff format. If it's 4, the SEC will be fine, as we see. If it's 12, the SEC is going to be fine. Whatever they decide to do, they're going to be fine. And so they're operating from a position of strength. And I think that was just Sankey's way of saying that, is that, look, if you guys don't want to play ball with us, we can take our ball and go home, so to speak. I don't think it's something that they'll actually do, but I think it's more of kind of a warning to folks like, hey, let's everybody get back on board and let's start going back towards what we thought and what's for the good of the game. The playoff format that they put together last summer that I thought was perfectly fine was for the good of the game, for the bigger picture. It was not just good for the SEC, it was good for everybody. And I think that's part of the message, like, hey, let's get back to that. And I couldn't agree more, to be quite honest with you. I wish we would get back to the 12-team format.
Sam, go stir something up so we can have a Jimbo Saban in the Big 12 in July. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time as always. Great stuff.
Thanks so much, guys. Y'all have a good one.
Sam Conn Jr., theathletic.com. We have Sam on, Max on. We've had others, Andy Staples, among others, do a great job. Seth Emerson, I think, at some point late next week. Appreciate him. Brett McMurphy will join us as well coming up at 4 o'clock today. There's a lot of great questions. And there is, for example, SS77. If high schools can play 17 potential games, the NFL can maybe play 21. Why is college football stuck at 15? It used to be stuck at 11 or 12. And it was always, we've got this academic schedule here, which is a bunch of crock of
But it was fine for basketball teams for
to
a
play
month.
35 or 40 games.
Yeah. But it's not even that. For a month,
they're
traveling for a month.
Yep.
I mean, there's no home games once you start March. March 4th, their home games are over, and you're in a conference tournament. You're in the NCAA tournament. So I know basketball teams have less players, but they figured out a way to do their classes on the road back in the 80s. So it's not like it's internet-based now. In the 80s, they had a way for them to travel.
Imagine where we'd be if there was the days of old when you played a regular season and some schools won a national title even if they lost their bowl game.
Yeah, that'd be
because
tough.
One of the national championship polls did not count bowl games. And then
I don't know how people did that without feeling like dirty about that.
Because Notre Dame did not want to play bowl games. And so that's part of that.
I'm talking about if you lost the bowl game and you still turned around and said, we're the champions, I think that's garbage. I'm sorry. I think that's garbage.
That's why they were split national titles.
Yeah.
In 1969, I think, even in I don't know 69, but I know in 1970, Texas won a national title and Nebraska won a national title. And it's just the